Hello folks, this is the Archaeology of the Ending of Civilization Part 5. This week we look at the Byzantines, the empire of the Eastern Roman world. The first thing that can be said about the last days of the Byzantine world is that all it was basically was the city that is popularly known as Byzantium, Constantinople, or today it's known as Istanbul. First image today is the Hagia Sophia, and the Hagia Sophia itself on the 29th of May 1453 was captured by Mehmed II and his forces, who had captured the city of Constantinople after a 5-week siege. The one thing that we're looking for today is the archaeology of the final event that led to the end of the Eastern Roman world. At one stage, the Eastern Roman world itself was, as it said, the whole eastern portion of the Eastern Roman Empire. When we're thinking about archaeological remains, what we do find in the archaeology is the remains of buildings, churches, walls, towers that were destroyed in that final event that ended precisely on the 29th of May 1453. As with the archaeology of this Eastern Roman city, the heart of what was left of the Eastern Roman Empire after the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476. We do find keen similarities between the West and the Eastern Roman world with this symbol, the aqueduct. Constantinople itself was to be the Emerald City of the Eastern Roman world. It had its cathedrals, it had its very grand city walls, the Theodosian walls, which were constructed and completed more or less by the death of Emperor Theodosius in 395, is to be seen on this plan. But there were also walls of Emperor Constantine as well. Between the walls of Emperor Constantine and Theodosius, basically the city was more or less vacant, which allowed them at times of trouble, such as that time on the in 1205, and obviously the final capture of the city in 1453 allowed them to grow crops whilst the city was under siege. Next image is Mehmed II entering Constantinople. Mehmed II was absolutely appalled with the destruction his men had wrought on Constantinople. There was a report of the final event which was so dire that I refused to read it out to my own students. Mehmed was appalled with the lack of respect that his men had paid to these Christians. Even though they were Muslims, he felt that the Christians and Muslims should live alongside each other in peace, as Saladin had preached at the time of the earlier Crusades. This image again shows some of the clergymen of one of the churches, maybe the Hagia Sophia, and they're basically at the knees of Mehmed II, who is saying, look, we do need Christian churches left standing in Constantinople, and he did something that could have been learned from in future wars, and that is that even though he was quite in despair of what his men had done to the city of Constantinople, he did actually have regiments of men who sent out to save the Christian churches from destruction, and one of those buildings being the great Hagia Sophia, which was the great Christian cathedral of the East, and is now the great Muslim temple of the world of Muhammad even today. So he spared that destruction. We've got lots of illustrations of the siege like this, with Mehmed II standing on a bridge as he's seeing the retreating Genoese and the Venetians. One thing about Constantinople is it was exceedingly rich. And the richness itself tells us a story of great wealth that remained within the Roman world. This is a coin of Basil II. Another illustration of the time of the Byzantines. They were involved in many battles between East and West. War between Christianity and Islam, but this war between the various peoples in the world had been going on for so long, and I feel that this idea that the wars in the East and the West are to do with religion is not in fact the true picture, when in fact people were warring pagan against pagan, East and West beforehand. One point I tried to make earlier on as well was Mehmed, in saving these sites from destruction, the message could have been learned when we invaded Iraq in the illegal war in 2003. We could have sent forces out to save the Baghdad Museum and places like Ur from destruction, which was not the case. Christian churches do survive in the archaeology intact in Constantinople, so again, history becomes fact in the archaeology. Look at its next image itself. In 1450, 3 years before the capture of Constantinople, the pink areas show all that was left of the empire of the East. Within 3 years, Greece, the peninsula of Greece, had actually fallen as well. The battle between the last Roman emperor, the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI. I've always thought that it's odd that the empire was forged and created initially by Romulus in 753 BC, and the last Roman emperor of the West was Romulus. In the East, the first major Roman emperor in the East in 337, Constantine the Great, is also the name given for the last Roman emperor in the East. More signs of the siege in this illustration, and an image of Mehmed II himself. One thing that can be said for Constantinople is the preservation of its archaeology, not just in stone walls, but in timber structures as well. This ship itself is one of 37 ships, and you can see the laden cargo there in a very intact state. The ship's being found in Constantinople. Moving again, when we look at the reconstructions of Constantinople, this is an unusual one. We know that Constantinople was surrounded by a wall on its environed seasides as much as its land sides. And the interesting thing is the person reconstructing this reconstructed it showing the walls as they stand in the time of reconstruction, and this is very recent. And then he's put how the walls would have looked like. Well, they don't have triremes today, and this reconstruction should have been a reconstruction as it looked back then before it was captured by Mehmed II. And I know that because there's no minaret. So this reconstruction, yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. It sounds very confused. I think I need to move on. This is Justinian I, and this is, I think it's Justinian I. It's either the second, it's definitely Justinian. Roughly at about 541, he became a proud emperor of the East. And this is a mosaic, a war mosaic from Ravenna, which is in northeast Italy. And you can see the gold tessera, a war mosaic being unusual in that they're usually on the floor. The world of the East being full of silver and gold. And this showing the pressure. The Eastern Roman world was surrounded by Islamic states, and it was seen as the bastion in the East against the Islamic world. And again, I'm absolutely obsessed in this lecture with the ships that have been found. They excavated thoroughly 8 ships in Istanbul, all ships of the Byzantine world. One thing I'll quickly say is that the Byzantine world is so coined by historians and archaeologists today because it got a bit confusing, people saying the Eastern Roman Empire all the time. But in fact, the Eastern Romans actually called themselves Roman, even make it more complicated. Mosaics themselves are to be seen as one of the great symbols of the Eastern Roman world and the Western Roman world, given the great cosmopolitan nature in styles and forms and in artistic license on the mosaics themselves. Again, moving back to these planks. Have we put them all together because it's a good illustration point. The preservation of the timbers for these ships is so brilliant that it makes the Mary Rose look like a walk in the park. 37 ships. And 8 of them have been massively, thoroughly excavated and conserved. You can see that this reliquary here, this gold reliquary, again gives you the wealth of the Constantinian world, both in Constantinian world, Byzantine world, both in 1204 and 1453. What we do see is that these little golden chests themselves, these ossuaries, these reliquaries, were smashed and destroyed. So the ones that do survive give us a good idea of what's going on. This itself is one of the cannons which was used by the Ottomans in sieges of Europe. This dates from 1464, but this is exactly the same style and form as one of the 14 that was used in the Great Siege of Constantinople in 1453. Of course, one of the great things that these Christian churches are known for, these Greek Orthodox churches, are the great frescoes, as you can see in this illustration. The ones at Hagia Sophia are beyond brilliant. But if you go to Cyprus and Greece, you can see in many of these churches these great domes with these great frescoes, and the great Coptic churches in Egypt as well. The Great Walls themselves, these are the walls of Constantinople. And I do believe that these are actually the walls of Constantine, rather than the walls of Theodosius. You will see a difference. Again, citing these walls on the plan, the walls of Constantine, the wall that you can see step back, protecting the main grey area of the city itself, and the Theodosius walls are on the outside. Again, more of the walls of Constantine. And as we move on, the idea of these mosaics as well, that they really love their mosaics, representation of a camel here. Don't have anything in the form of burial to illustrate these slides, but this was actually a burial excavated with the ship burials. The ships with the dried up sort of harbour at Istanbul, the Byzantine ships, and this is the burial associated with them using ships' timbers. With this burial, you can see the well-preserved nature of the body itself. This illustration here shows a basilica. The basilica of one of the basilicas excavated in and around Constantinople. The idea of sarcophagi, great sarcophagi that you can see excavated at the site, or found at the site in places like Hagia Sophia. Again, giving you another idea of one of the frescoes. This is something I was trying to say earlier on. In 476, the rump of the Roman Empire in the East was perfectly intact, whereas in the West, it was mainly lost to the Vandals, the Visigoths, and the Huns, and so on. This again, giving you another illustration of changes in the Eastern Roman world. And one thing that we always forget, and we shouldn't forget, is the Varangians, when they're supporting the Roman emperors from the 900s to the 1300s. And maybe if they would have been in presence fighting against the Islamic horde, and there were apparently 300,000 people besieging Constantinople in 1453, and there were no more than 12,000 defenders, so the odds are quite... there you go, 30 to 1. One of the great mosaics of the Byzantine world. Archaeologists showing their worth in looking for all the bits and pieces associated with the great city and excavations at Constantinople, and this is the Theodosian walls. 4 tiers of defences: an outer scarp defence, ditch. Then you've got another wall defending the ditch full of water, and then you've got another wall with towers, and then you've got the inner wall with very high towers, as you can see in this. We've got an illustration coming up. Illustration at the stage that Constantinople has been captured by Mehmed's hordes. and you've got the minarets there. This is how we can date this illustration. Another aqueduct which were essential for water supplies with Constantinople. Again, another plan showing the walls of Constantine and Theodosius. The siege itself and the external Theodosian walls. By the time they breached the Theodosian walls, the walls of Constantine weren't up to purpose, simply because there were very few defenders to defend them. Most of the Greeks had gone home to defend their wives and children, and the Genoese and Venetian soldiers were fleeing for their lives. The type of trireme still being used by the Byzantines, maybe in the 1400s, and again giving you a good illustration of them. They've got a membrane on this to that they could get a good impression of the timbers before they raise them, and again pile driving into ships early on before their excavations, and you can actually see that they just missed the hub of the ship, so that's good. So we got the good preservation. Byzantines, as they may still have looked in 1453. And I love these illustrations of sieges. I showed this to one of my students, Sandra in Barry, and she said, wow, that's exactly, if you take away the people and stuff, that's exactly how the walls of Theodosius look today, giving you a good impression of this land of the Constantines. Chiorio design, there you go, and again, Christianity, the symbols remained in the likes of Hagia Sophia because they thought this was a Christian site. It's now a Muslim site, but let's not destroy what's before. And that's a good philosophy of Mehmed, something that the American soldiers could have learned in 2003 when they were looting and pillaging churches and Islamic sites and museums in 2003. But that's the American view, not having much care for the history and archaeology of other worlds. The great conqueror. Again, the archaeology of Constantinople is littered around, and you can see that in this illustration. When the Crusaders entered the city in 1204 to do a great slight against Christendom on the Fourth Crusade, they destroyed most of the great treasures that had been gathered there by the Roman emperors and had been taken there in safety by Constantine the Great. But this itself is one of those great carved, spiraled columns that survived in Constantinople, not completely destroyed by these Christian crusaders destroying a Christian city. The Catholic crusaders versus the Greek Orthodox soldiers, and they hated the Greek Orthodox, and it's said that at this point in 1204 was the death nail of the Christianity in the East, because the Crusaders, who were on the way to Jerusalem, decided to destroy Constantinople, its great ally. Again, the Roman remains that we can see in the great Istanbul, still standing today, and more of the sense of the mosaics of the Eastern Roman world, both in normal domestic houses and in the churches. Again, this is a church. You can see the apsidal end, the remains of a church here, but many Greek Orthodox churches from this earlier period still survive, and again we come across many artifacts like this in the archaeology. Reconstruction, and one thing that I used to say to my students before I saw this illustration, this was the accepted thing, that amphora was stored on racks in ships. But now we know they were stacked upright. What you'd do in this illustration, you have a little coil of rope, and you would support the amphora above it. So this is something that we've learned from these shipwrecks. Again, another beautiful illustration of the siege of the Theodosian walls and the final capture of Constantinople on 29th of May 1453. The great Hagia Sophia. Note the symbolisms of Islam in there and Christian symbolism alongside each other. I love this this wonderful fresco, and what I would say is that when the people captured this Christian church, in the panel down towards the bottom there are sort of Allah is great and all the rest of it, but they haven't destroyed the fresco itself. They've just put their Islamic mark on this Christian fresco and not destroyed it, so I think that's good. A coin from 1361, the gold standard, was something fixed in the Roman world in the East all the way through to the 1200s when the Crusaders destroyed the city. Again, another illustration of Varangian horsemen. Reconstruction of the Great Walls of Theodosius. There are two illustrations here, and you can see the 4 tiers of defences, and behind the interesting thing is it's a section of vacant land with trees and agriculture. Another plan to give you an idea of the walls of Theodosius and Constantine as the city itself. More information about the Varangians, the bodyguard of the emperor. There's some say that the Varangians, these Vikings, these Swedish Vikings, were those Vikings that managed to keep the Byzantine Empire so intact for many generations. Cross section of the walls of Theodosius, and you can see the water table. The interesting thing is the water itself, if it was drained by the attacker, could be refilled by the defender. So I think that's a wonderful piece of technology. Those that you know Wales, you'll know that Edward I built his chain of castles in North Wales on the design of Constantinople, particularly Carnarvon Castle in the north. And as we go on to the last slide, reconstruction of part of the walls of Theodosius, and it's in tribute to those people in the Department of Antiquities in Turkey who have decided that this would be a worthy reconstruction to give a great overview of the history of Constantinople and a Byzantine world. This is Karl-James for channel 01 to 1975. Over and out.